Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. So welcome to the 2024, the Year to Soar Intention Setting Workshop. Before we get stuck right into it though, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of our ancestors and of country. So today I'd like to acknowledge and recognise the Noongar people as traditional custodians on the land which I'm joining you from today, and also pay respect to the ongoing relationship these custodians have with their land and their leaders, past, present and emerging. But I'd also like to make mention as well of our ancestors that may have been on the land. And obviously the traditional custodians are the ones that love the land and prepared the land for us colonialized kind of people or immigrants that have come in from time to time. But our ancestors have also contributed as well. So I just like to acknowledge them too. Now, I know you haven't seen my face yet, but before we get going, I just introduce myself. So I'm actually a human behavior specialist and a clinical hypnotherapist. So I look at human behaviors and how I can understand them better. And that's been a passion of mine. And then I went into kind of the therapy space. But I also work with businesses as well, doing work with their leaders and helping them improve culture and workplace psychological safety. So they're all my kind of specialty areas. So this workshop or webinar or whatever we're doing today, I'm actually probably going to also use the audio from this and the video for my podcast. So I also have a podcast called the Catching the Octopus podcast. So if you're tuning in from the podcasting platform, hello and welcome. So today we're going to look at a few different things. We're going to look at, there we go, what you want to achieve in the year, what's going to happen if you don't make changes, right? Because what our biggest problem is one of my spiritual teachers talks about big fish eat little fish, right? So we come into the new year and we have these intentions that we want to work with, but we don't do anything about all of our origin stories and all of our mindset space and all of our influences around us. So all of that we don't do anything with, and we try and set these new intentions and we do them for a week or two and they go, right? So it's about looking at what can we change to try and really empower those intentions more. Also, what's standing in your way, and then a little bit on moving forward. And as I said, there will be a bit of an exercise as well that we'll go through. So if you're listening on the podcast, you can jump onto the YouTube channel and get the details from there if you get a bit lost or a bit confused. So we do have people online. If you want to interact as well, you can do so through the chat or you can jump on. Just know if you jump on and make comments, like I said, it is recorded so people will see what you say later on. So to start off with, I suppose let's get into what do you want to achieve? Like, what is the purpose of setting intentions and what do you want the new year to look like for you? What do you want to achieve in 2024? What are the things that you're looking at from a goal perspective, probably from a personal development perspective, maybe even a relationship perspective? So the first thing we need to look at from then is evaluating then where we sit in all of these areas. So here's 8 different well-being factors. So we've got physical well-being, social well-being, environmental well-being, occupational well-being, emotional well-being, intellectual or psychological well-being, financial well-being, and spiritual well-being. And studies have shown us, so if I tap into my psychology area, studies have actually shown us that it's not just one area of our life we need to work on if we want to have that overall well-being space, right? And if we're setting intentions to have, say, physical well-being, but we're not looking after the emotional well-being, or the psychological well-being, then we're probably going to lose the motivation to keep focusing on the physical. Right. So it's about doing a bit of an inventory of your whole life cycle and where kind of everything's sitting to see where you can make changes holistically that can then support these intentions. So if anyone's done any life coaching or anything like that before, you've probably seen this. It's called a well-being wheel, and it has space for each of these well-being areas so that we can actually do a bit of a score. So if you have a pen and paper with you handy, great. Pull that out now. If you don't, you can do this exercise later whenever you feel like it. But just draw a circle on a piece of paper and then draw some circles inside of that. And you can see from this diagram there, it's going to allow you to score it out of 10. And if you can't be bothered drawing all of those circles, you can at least just have a piece of a pie and you can write a number in there or shade it to where you think it sort of fits from 0% to 100%. So it's a really good tool then to be able to look at and say, okay, where do I sit on this and what can I do better in this space? So if we start with physical, okay, so where do you think you sit on that physical level? Do you think you sit at a 2 and you don't have any physical well-being? Or do you think you sit at about a 5? You know, maybe you go for a walk quite regularly or you have access to the gym, but your diet probably isn't great or your food intake. So you'd probably sit around the 5. Maybe you're good in all areas in that physical space, but you might find that you do strength training, but your flexibility isn't great. So even though you're fit and healthy, there's still an element that you could prove on the physical, or maybe doing some yoga or some Pilates or something to get that that happening for you. So rate the physical. The next one we've got there is the social. So looking at how are your relationships. Me, myself, I actually am really enjoying a lot of me time at the moment. I've had a pretty challenging 2023, and I found that me time was really therapeutic. So although I have really great relationships, I'm probably not investing in some of them as much as I could. So I reckon I'd probably sit around the 7 on that one. So there's some space for me in 2024 to improve that sort of aspect. Now, although I haven't been able to go out and do as much as I'd like, you know, I still have that core network that I've been able to rely upon. So I'm not really too low on that. Next one's environmental. So this is a whole range of aspects with environmental, you know, looking at where you live. Do you have resources that you need? Do you have access to doctors, or do you have access to other support services? Do you have the tools you need in your home? You know, do you have a couch to sit on, or are you just starting out and just got some bean bags or something like that? So looking at that physical environmental space, you know, do you have access to be able to go and spend time in nature, whether that's at the beach or a river or in bush, or maybe you have plants around you that can give you that green space. So looking at your environmental, also with that, looking at the company you keep. So are the people that you're surrounding yourself with being in that support mode? Are they supporting you to be able to go and achieve what you want to achieve in 2024? You know, environmental is also looking at, you know, the workplace that you're in. It's looking at the transport that you use, you know, it's looking at a whole range of things. So if you think out now, my environmental well-being, how do you think you feel just sitting in the world around you is a really good summary. The next one is occupational well-being. So do you get satisfaction out of your job? Do you have a career you love? Or if you don't love it, does it bring in lots of money and compensate? I don't know. Some people are happy with that because then that money is a resource for them to be able to go and do what they love, right? Are you fortunate enough to be like me and thought, flip the monopoly board on the day job and go and start your own business? But also in that occupational space, that's great. I get to do what I love, but there's a lot of challenges that come with that as well. So out of a score from 0 to 10, kind of rate yourself on where you sit there. Then there's the emotional element. And the emotional element is affected by a lot of things. The emotional element can be affected by some of the circumstances that you're facing at the moment. They can also be affected by your mindset, how you were raised, belief systems that you've been given. But I think the key one there is they are really affected when we're under that illusion that we can't control our emotional space. So, everyone is able to control emotions, but sometimes we just choose not to. Let me give you an example. So I think nearly every person I've met has had a place where they've been really super angry, really frustrated. Something's gone on, whether it's kids or pets or work or something, you're really frustrated. And then the phone rings and you pick up the phone, you're like, hello. And you've just switched emotions. Right. But the kicker on that is you hang up the phone and then you're like in your brain, where was I? And you go back into that mood again. So we've created these emotions because we think that they've got purpose for us, and we lose the space of understanding that we can control them. So with the emotional well-being, where do you sit on that scale of being able to control your emotions, or do they control you? The next one is the psychological space. So looking at your mindset. This time of year can be really challenging for people, especially if they've lost loved ones during the year, or they've had major changes to their life. And they're very reflective at this time of year, thinking about what could have been rather than what is. So looking at where you kind of sit on that space. And, our psychological well-being or our mental health kind of goes on a scale, sliding scale. And we don't sit in the same spot all the time. That's just natural. So we can be really down one end of the scale, so at a 0, where we're actually in a space where we may be institutionalized, hospitalized, highly medicated, highly regulated, and really unable to function in the same way as others. Or we can go up the other end of the scale and we can just be, fully enlightened being, unicorns and rainbows, all of the glitter and all of the sparkles, right? So there's no one that I've personally met that sits on either end of those, but there's definitely people that I've met that slide up and down that scale. So in this space, where do you sit? 0 to 10. Financial well-being, this is an interesting one because usually from society space, we're not encouraged to talk about finances. So finances are something that we usually keep to ourselves. But where are we sitting on the financial scale? Do we struggle to make ends meet every week from a financial aspect? Or do we have, unlimited financial resources that just, we're getting $1 million interest a day, right? So there's two ends of that scale. Where kind of are we sitting? Most people with a moderate income will be in a space where they're able to cover their expenses and have a little bit to do some of the things that bring them joy as well. And some people that might sit at about a 5 or a 6. Some people might be at an 8 where they're able to have that financial resources. They've been able to save, possibly invest, and they've actually got more coming in that they're able to invest every week. So it depends where you sit on that space. The spiritual aspect. So spiritual aspect can be a range of things. It's not particularly set to a religion or anything like that. It's more set to how connected we are with self. So the spiritual and the emotional are quite closely connected, right? Because the more we are connected to spirit and self, the more awareness we have over controlling our emotions. It also comes into the physical as well, because the more we're connected to self, the more we serve ourselves by eating the right things and moving in the right ways. The more we are social, the way we choose the people that we spend time around, where we're in work, how we're able to get through that and see those things. So the spiritual is connected to kind of all of those. And do you have some kind of spiritual practice? Maybe you do have some religious aspects of, maybe you go to mass and maybe you have prayer time that you give yourself. Maybe you're a little bit non-traditional and you do go into that meditation space as well and have time for yourself there. Maybe you go into loving sound or retreats or anything like that, anything that gives you that time with self. I know some people just spending time with their family is really what fills their spirit. So at Christmas time, a lot of people are actually probably higher on that spiritual level, because they're getting to do the things that they love in that space. So mark down all of those things on your well-being wheel, and just keep that handy for a moment, because we're going to revisit this later when we come up with setting some intentions. So the next thing I wanted to look at with you is, what if you don't make the change? What's going to happen there? So this is kind of a bit more of a visualization exercise of just sitting in it and thinking about, you've got the leadership wheel there, or the well-being wheel. You've gone around and you've identified the areas of your life that could use improvement. But what happens if you don't do any improvement? What happens if you still stay in that financial space, that emotional space, that spiritual space, or psychological space? What's that going to look like for you? And when we're looking at what that's going to look like, we're also going to look at how that's going to affect us, how that'll affect us emotionally, physically, and mentally. So, how it's going to affect our ability to control our emotions and have resilience in times of suffering, because we all know that that's kind of a constant in life, is there is suffering, right? It happens. We're faced with it. But how do we bounce back from that? Where's our emotional space there? How will it affect us physically? And when I say physically, I don't mean just the physical body, but the way that we behave. How is that going to affect our relationships because of the way that we behave with other people if we don't make changes? And how's that going to affect our mental capacity as well? So just now, you can close your eyes or you can leave them open. If you're in vehicles driving, don't close your eyes. But if in this space, I just want you to sit there for a moment and just imagine those things in your life that aren't serving you now, and kind of look ahead 5 years. And just imagine what your life is going to look like in that space. If you're not looking after your health, then what's that going to look like for you in 5 years' time? Does that mean that you're going to be on extra medication, or you're going to have limited mobility, or you're not going to be able to do some of those things that you love? If you don't look at after your finances, what does that look like for you in 5 years' time? Are you not going to be able to go on some holidays that you planned, or go and have more of your mortgage paid off to set yourself up for retirement, or even just go out and splurge on festivals or just those moments of joy? So having a think as well about, those other aspects on the wheel as well. What about your relationships? What if you don't change things in those relationships? How is that going to look like for you in 5 years? Are they going to be serving you? Are you still going to be frustrated or feeling down about things? So just taking that in, because we're recording it, I won't ask people to speak out loud, but if you could pop in the chat, what is it going to look like for you in 5 years if you don't make these changes? Now, some people might think it's going to look great, but most of us are in a space where we're kind of feeling like it's not going to be really that great. I know for me, some of the things that I would love to do around some of the intentions that I have set are more about my growth. And if I don't do that in 5 years' time, I'm not going to have achieved some of the business goals that I want to do. I need to do more learning. I need to do more expanding. I need to challenge my mindset with a few things as well. And so I've identified all of those. And if we look at the pain that comes with not doing it, then that is going to be a lot stronger as a motivator to actually push through to do it, because the brain likes what's familiar, right? So when we go into a space that's unfamiliar, which is usually New Year's intentions, right? We're doing something that it's not a habit for us already. So when we go to do something that's unfamiliar, we have some resistance from our mind. Yep. So one of the comments is about the financial situation. Yeah. Otherwise, when you get older, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. Yeah. Perfect. So we want to be able to be in a space that when the mind challenges and goes, hey, this isn't familiar, feeling threatened by this, I'm going to start sabotaging you. You have that strength of going, yeah, you can give me those sabotages, brain, but if I don't reach this goal, that's going to be more painful than your sabotages, and I'm going to step over them, right? So really giving us a strong why is what we want to do. And that strong why, we have to connect with that on an emotional level. And to connect with that on an emotional level is easily done through experiencing the pain associated with it. Right. So there's two reasons that will actually motivate us for change. And that's the draw to the pleasure far exceeds where we are now, or the avoidance of the pain far exceeds where we are now. And so that's why we're going to tap into that. So if you walk away from this and you go to do this exercise later on, really sit in there and give yourself that visualized experience of what's going to happen if I don't change, because it's something we don't normally think about. We just think about, oh, if I do change, I'll have this and this and this and this. And sometimes that's not a strong enough motivator. So, as I said before, the brain likes what's familiar, and that can be something that stands in our way. But there could be other things as well that could pop up that could actually stand in your way of achieving your goals. So, the next step is let's have a look at that, right? Let's bring awareness into that so that we can have some sort of understanding, and then we can put things in place. It's kind of like doing a risk assessment in a business, right? You go in and you look, oh, here's all the potential things that could go wrong. How are we going to prevent those? So this is about, let's look at what's standing in your way from achieving your goals, and let's put in some preventative controls for that. So some obstacles from change, there's so many of them, but in our short little time together in this session, we'll talk about these things here. We'll talk about state, story, and strategy. We'll talk about origin stories. We'll talk about current habits that don't align with your new goals. And we'll also talk a little bit more about those self-sabotages. So let's look at state, story, strategy. So we usually, when we go to approach things, if we're approaching them from I suppose, a flat state, not much energy, maybe we've just had an argument with someone, or we've had a hard time, or it's not a good day for us. If we go to set intentions while we're in that state, what do you think the intentions are going to look like? Do you think they're going to be bold and outrageous and really challenging? Or do you think they're going to be small and safe? Right? So if you want to create some really great things for yourself that are bold and outrageous and challenging, then you need to get into the right state for that. And it's simply by creating some sort of priming in that area. So you can do that through music. I have a playlist that I have a few different playlists that I've set up for different things that I do. So it gets me in the right state when I go to do that. So there's playlists I have for when I go and deliver programs. There's playlists that I have for when I'm about to hang out with my family. There's playlists that I have when I know I'm about to go into a challenging situation, right? So you can find some music that really connects with you, that can lift up your energy and lift up those vibrations a little bit.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
And then once you're in the right state, the next thing to look at is the story. What's the story you're telling yourself? You know, how are you telling yourself that that's not available to me? Or only people are born into money can afford those things? Or you have to be lucky to be able to have success in this and that area, right? Or, no one in my family's ever done that. That's not available to me. or it's not possible for me. So looking at what's the story you're telling yourself. Oh, I'm just a mum. If you've been a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home parent, I'm just a stay-at-home parent. I don't have ambitions to be able to go and do that. And then when we unpack that story, we can find out that, oh, hang on, is that fact, or is that what you're telling yourself because you don't want to go and step out because that's going to be uncomfortable, right? That's going to be unfamiliar. That could open us up to a space where we're criticized or we fail or, all of these other things that don't feel comfortable to us. So getting yourself in the right state, getting yourself the right story, or at least identifying the story you've got, and then setting up the right strategies. And so something like this is good part of a strategy, right? It's actually looking at how you're going to make it happen. There's, there's what are they called? SMART goals is a really good strategy. Tony Robbins has one called RPM, really good strategy. So there's so many strategies out there you can use. But if you had the right strategy, but you didn't have the right state and the right story, do you think you're going to achieve your goals? Probably not. Heaps of people have great strategies, but if the strategies aren't implemented, if they don't have the right intention, if they're not in the right space to do it, then it normally doesn't come off. So the next one we were talking about was origin stories. What's in us, in our subconscious, that might be preventing us? Do we have a fear of X, Y, and Z? Has someone told us our whole lives we're not good at singing, and so we don't sing? And even if we're not good, we still should sing, right? Same with dancing. It's just a part of who we are. But, what are those origin stories that come up when we sit in and we set our goals? Do we really believe we're going to be able to achieve them? Now, it's interesting, if you look at the Olympics, right? If we pick a sport, maybe long distance running, and we have the fastest person in the world, right? And a couple of years comes along, and then we have another fastest person in the world that went faster. Now, evolution may be playing a part, granted, but once that fastest person in the world hits their fastest time, very rarely do they go and exceed that, right? Because that's where their block is. That's where they think their abilities sit. But more is possible. So where in our minds are we looking at these origin stories that are coming up that are setting limits for us? That stop us from imagining that more is possible and stop us from believing that more is possible. There's also our current habits not aligning with new goals. So one of my really bad habits is Magnum ice cream in front of the TV after dinner and maybe some chocolate snacks as well. So if you have a habit that is a Magnum ice cream, watching movies after dinner, and chocolate snacks, chances are you're probably not going to have really great success with your health goals, right? If
Lex
you
on her
if you
webinar.
if you have a financial goal, but one of your habits is scrolling through Shopify and buying heaps of cool things, or having emails come through from Temu or My Deal that have all of these really cool sales on, chances are you're not going to hit your financial goals. Right? So have a look at some of the things that you've identified in your wheel, and then look at your everyday habits and have a look and go, okay, these are some of the things that we need to tweak, because it's all good saying I'm going to do this, but we focus when we say I'm going to do this on what we have to do. I have to do that. I have to go and get this equipment. I have to turn up this regularly. I have to go get some new running shoes, whatever it is. But very rarely do we actually sit back and go, hang on, what do I have to stop doing? What do I have to get rid of? Maybe it's I need to get rid of that show that I watch, that Netflix, or maybe it's I need to get rid of that that person that's always telling me I can't do things, or whatever it is. There's always things that we have that sit in our habits that we need to change and get rid of if we want to achieve these intentions. And then the last thing we had there was looking at self-sabotages. Self-sabotages are so subliminal sometimes we don't even realize that they're there. But it's okay, I want to get healthy, but then you ring up the friend that loves pizza, right? And go, hey, do you want to go and have some dinner together? Knowing you're going to have pizza. You might say, oh, I'm going to have some really good financial goals, but you don't you don't have a separate account that you're putting finances into. So it's just sitting in that one account and you're just like, oh, there's money there. She'll be right. You might sabotage yourself with your health goals. You might start going for a run, but then you end up booking in something that stops you from doing that in the morning, right? Or in the afternoon. Or you might have so many other things come up that sit in that self-sabotage. So although this is something that we can't really sometimes be proactive about, it's something to create awareness about. Okay. Because it is an obstacle for us. So when we're going through and we're looking at these intentions and achieving them, when something blocks us, stopping and going, oh, was that a self-sabotage? Dang, I'm not going to let that stand in my way. Right. And have that will that can push through when that's been identified. So we talked before about changing your state and your story and your strategy. So I just want to go a little bit deeper in that because that's a really important part of how we can actually create some real meaningful change for ourselves. So starting with changing your state, okay? If you don't change your state, you get stuck, right? I heard this phrase, which I use all the time, which is just so brilliant. Never make a decision drunk, right? And I don't mean just off alcohol. I mean drunk off emotion. And that doesn't just mean sad or unhelpful emotions. That also means when you're too happy. So I did Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within. It was such a great program. I totally loved it. But at the end, there's some other programs he gets you to do. And because I got myself in such a good state through the program, you could have sold me, an Eskimo could have sold me ice. No, I could have been an Eskimo and someone could have sold me ice. Right? I was just so hungry for more. I felt so good. I was in this really great space, right? And I signed up to all the programs. So later on, I had a chat with them and I pulled out of a couple. But, in that space, I wasn't balanced. Right. And so looking at making sure you're in a really nice balanced state. But if you need to push yourself forward and you need to take risks, heighten your emotions. Right. If you need to be a bit more withdrawn and you need to be a bit of a space where you're actually looking and observing more, then tone down your state and your emotions. Looking at where your state is as well, you don't want to play that same broken record over and over in your head again. If anyone's seen, I talk about the looping thoughts ladder from Marissa Peer, and that goes into that space, right? If we don't change our state, we stay in that looping thought. And if you want to break out of being stuck, then change your state to create new options and new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. And there's a whole range of different ways that you can do that. Feel free to email me if you want some more details on how you can break out of being stuck. But, changing that state and creating those new options and those new way of thinking can seem something that's really tricky, but it can be as simple as, like I said, the music before. Look at ways to prime yourself. You can have motivational messages on your mirror. So the first thing you do when you wake up, you see something that's supporting you. There's so many more. You can even just Google it if you wanted to and say, what are some strategies I can use to get my emotional state better? And there'll be a whole range that come up. I will keep going, but I'm just conscious of time. So I don't want to go too far over because I know it is New Year's Day. So everyone wants to get back to their life. So the next one is changing your story, right? So if you want to get results, then you need to change your story. And stories are what drives us day to day, and they are what inspire us to action or prevent us from moving a muscle, right? So they can go either way. It's interesting, someone that loves to write would just say that they're a hacker until they published a book, and then in their mind, they're a writer, right? That creates that space and that changes that story for them. When I first started doing Get Up and Grow, it was many, many years ago, doing completely different things. I've evolved since then. But for me, it was just a bit of pocket money. And so it stayed a bit of pocket money for years and years until I changed my story about that and went, no, this is my career. And this, I'm going to actually go full on in this. Right. Some people will say, oh, I'm not good at physical activity. Do you think they're going to be really good on their physical element of their well-being wheel? Right? Some people will tell themselves, oh, I just spend money, or I'm always depressed. I've got heaps of mental health conditions. Yes, even though that's a fact, excuse me, are you telling yourself that story? Are you creating that narrative around yourself? Or are you looking at things can change? Everything's subject to change and everything is constantly changing. But we get in this space where we want to try and keep it stuck, and stop things changing, because changing can be associated with a lot of fear, right? And then one key thing that changing does is it makes things unfamiliar. And I said earlier on, brain doesn't like what's unfamiliar. So it will go back and pull up those stories, excuse me, to be able to validate where you are and staying in that space. So when you set your intentions, if you find that there's an obstacle and you find that something's going on, check out your inner dialogue. What are you telling yourself? Are you telling yourself this is hard? If you set yourself goals and every time you go to the gym, you're like, oh, this is so hard, what do you think that's going to do for you? Right? If you're going to work and every day you're going to work, you're like, I hate that particular person. I don't want to see them today. Or my job sucks. It's so stressful. Whatever you're telling yourself, that's a story that you're creating. Now, I'm not saying to flip it and be unrealistically positive, because that's not going to be a solution. But look in there and find out, what are the facts. So the gym, oh, it's too hard. No, it's hard, but it's not too hard because you just did it, right? So even just changing some of those little words will help you change your story in that space. And then we talked about changing your strategy. So just going a little bit deeper on that as well, looking at when you want to change a strategy, model the best and work backwards from what works. So look at, okay, if this is my end game, travel back on that space. What do I need to do to get there? What do I need to change and move towards and start including in my habits or in my life? And what do I need to change and stop including in my habits in my life? So looking at that from a backwards perspective, rather than going, I want to, good example is I heard someone that was a business coach and said he has people coming to him saying, I want to have 1 million clients a year. And he's like, well, that's great, but do you have the systems for 1 million clients a year? Do you have the resources for 1 million clients a year? Do you have the products for 1 million clients a year? So it's great to do those big, hairy, audacious goals. It's amazing to do those. But if you're going to do them, go backwards and set yourself some goals along the way. Okay, so going backwards would be, okay, I'm going to go and get all the systems I need to be able to have in place for that. Or I'm going to go and get some more resources, get a VA or get some temping staff or something like that in. All right, so looking at that backwards and breaking it down a little bit more on how and what you need to do to achieve it can be really helpful with that strategy. Tony Robbins, he says success leaves clues. And I really love that, because we have so many amazing people that we can model from. Right? We can tap in. There are coaches out there if you wanted to go down the coaching element. There is RTT, which is what I do, which talks about changing and the state and the story, which then results in changing strategy. There's you can go on YouTube and you can Google so many different things, or search, because Google isn't YouTube, but you could Google and find YouTube. You know what I'm saying, right? You can get on the internet and there's so much out there. I mean, this here was a freebie today for those that turned up live. So you can access lots of different things. There's so many podcasts, there's so many things out there. So whatever you want your big, hairy, audacious goal, if that's what you choose to do, whatever you want that to be, find someone else who's already achieved that goal and then follow how they did it. You might tweak some things along the way because it might not actually connect with you or it might not feel right, but at least you've got a bit of a rough plan rather than trying to go from it from start. And when I started my business, I did a fair bit of that. I went and sought people that have done stuff similar to me beforehand because it saved a lot of time and mistakes and resources, right? On doing the same things wrong that they'd already done before. And the last one we just had here was leverage the lesson from the school of hard knocks that others have already figured out for you, which I just kind of covered there. So we've got now what would happen if we don't do our goals. We've got an evaluation of our life and our well-being model, and we've got an idea of some things that we'd like to change. We've also now created some awareness around stuff that's going to pop up, right? The stuff that's going to try and stop us from getting it. So what do we do now, right? How do we move forward and go into a space where we're actually going to achieve these goals and set the right intentions? And, sometimes even a sabotage can be is people will set themselves up with a goal or an intention that they're never going to meet. And that can reaffirm their story that, see, I'm just not built for that, or that's just not made for me, or I'm not enough to achieve that. So making sure that when we're moving forward, we're doing some things that are going to be more helpful for us. So firstly is whatever you're looking to do, connect with it on an emotional level. Go through that exercise that we spoke about at the start and think about what's going to happen if I don't achieve this. Right? Go into that space and then go into what's going to happen if I do. So then you're giving your mind the two elements. You're giving them the mind the pain, but you're also giving the mind the pleasure. And that's going to be a really great driving force to change some of that subconscious programming and those stories and the story that you give yourself, and also some of those subconscious belief systems. Whatever you're doing, make them realistic and achievable. Like I just said before, there's no point saying for me to be play tennis at Wimbledon, because that's never going to happen, right? It's not realistic and it's not achievable. But it might be to just start to learn play tennis and play it competitively in a local. That would work. That's realistic and achievable. So we still have to look at, everyone says that anything's possible and you can achieve anything. And there is truth to that, but we also have to take stock of what our limitations are, right? There's no way that I will win the 40 under 40 award because, believe it or not, I'm over 40, right? That's not realistic and achievable. So it's not about dampening your dreams. It's just more about looking at what is available and then choosing your intentions that fit within that scope. The next one we have here is setting up a way to make them measurable. How can you measure them along the way? Because the thing is, when we do set goals and we do set intentions, sometimes say if it's a weight thing and we say, okay, I want to lose 20 kilos. If we haven't started from the end game and worked our way back and thought, okay, to lose 20 kilos, I need to lose X amount every month or X amount every week, then we can go and measure that. And every month or every week we can go, yep, we're on par for that goal. Yep, we're on par for that goal. Right. So if we set ourselves a goal that is really hairy and audacious and big, right, but we don't set ourselves little milestones on achieving that along the way, then we're probably going to give it up. That big fish is probably going to eat that little fish. It's going to seem too hard. It's not going to seem achievable. We're not going to have the belief in ourselves or the mindset needed. So set things up that you can measure along the way. And when you do measure them along the way, then you need to also celebrate when you do hit those milestones. You need to actually have the success celebrations, right? And give yourself a pat on the back. But if you don't meet it, then we don't beat ourselves up. That just means we need to adjust. So we can go to the story of, see, that was a silly goal to make. I was never going to achieve that. Or we can go to the story of, right, that didn't work. What can I do differently so it does work? Right? Who can I go and model? Who can I go and talk to give me some tips that's going to help that work? Or what resources can I get on the internet that can help readjust where I'm sitting? Because anything you do in life, like 20% of it is the physical resources and the actual actions you take. 80% of it is the psychology. So I love watching, what's it called now? SAS. Yeah. So I was watching this one episode of SAS Australia. I just love how it tests their mental capacity. And they had this beam that was really super high that was strapped in though if they fell. And they had to walk through some obstacles on this beam and get to the other side and then back again. Anyway, the details don't really matter. But what I noticed is the first 3 or 4 people that went through didn't do it. And they were telling themselves, oh, that's impossible. We can't do that. It's impossible. Now, as soon as one person did do it, everyone else did it, right? Because then it became possible. So that's where the mindset element comes in. We go back to those stories and those self-sabotages. If you believe something isn't possible, then it's never going to be possible. You're definitely right. You know, I have, even with the work I do in the therapy space, it's a little bit alternative. And I've had some people say, oh, that's just placebo and that doesn't really work. And I'm like, well, to you, it won't, right? Because if your belief is so strong on something, then that's where you're going to be. That's how placebo works, right? They have all these tablets, they do all these trials. And did you know that to be actually put through in the system, it has to have a 90% accuracy? But they can do 100 different trials to get to that 90% accuracy, right? But there's so many that fail. And the reason why they fail is the mind is so powerful that it can self-heal. You know, if you cut yourself tomorrow, it heals, right? So we're designed to do it. But a lot of the times we don't think it's possible. Yet if you give me a little pill, even if it's got sugar in it, and you tell me that pill is going to be the cure, then my brain goes, cool, it is possible now, and it makes it happen. So even science acknowledges that, or the way we think actually influences our body and the way that we heal, right? It also influences what we do, how we achieve things, how we approach the goals and the intentions that we set. And, you know, even if you're only moving just a little bit every day towards your intention, that might even just be your goal, right? Small changes make a big difference. And there's a chart I've got here for the people just listening on audio, but it's come from Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it just shows 1% getting better every day is on an exponential curve, right? Upwards. And if you go 1% better every day for a year, you'll end up 37.78% better over the course of the year. So that's nothing to be sneezed at, right? When you think that 1% is really just not really that much. You know, 1% might be if you're working towards a health goal, 1% might be just getting up a little bit earlier and doing some stretches, right? Nothing too insane. And there's a thing called the slippery slope as well, right? From a psychological perspective, salespeople use it all the time. So it's getting you to commit to something little, and then that makes you more inclined to commit to the next thing and the next thing. So use the 1%, commit to something little like just doing stretches, and then in a week's time go, I'm actually going to extend the time or go for a walk or whatever it is to build on that. If your end game, you know, looking at backwards, that might be how you do it. You know, if you're looking at financially, it might be your end game might be to have investment properties and be financially secure, but you're not going to be able to do that until you take the tiny steps. And your 1% better might be every day, might be just putting $2 away into a money box, right? Every day. And then you might increase that to 5. And then you might use that money to then go and invest in something, buy a small little bit of shares or something like that, or even just use that to go and invest in some additional resources that can make you money. Maybe use that money to go and get you some additional training or qualifications or coaching or whatever it is, right? But it's going to start something small. That's okay. Because I think people think even with these big, audacious, hairy goals that they've got, that they need to take big steps to get to them. And let me tell you, even myself within Get Up and Grow, there's been times where I've actually even had to step back, right, to be able to go forward, to be able to reach my goals. And that's okay as long as we're measuring and we've got those successes we're celebrating. And then if we're not hitting those elements, we're adjusting and changing and pivoting along the way. So what do you need to do then? So we've covered a lot of material today, a fair bit. At the end of the day, as a really quick summary, what do you need to do to get you to your goal? Well, you need to establish a helpful story. You can, and you need to create changes in habits. You still need to set up a plan, and whether that's a SMART goal set up, or whether you do something like TR's RPM, or whether you just set it up to give yourself what the goal is, when you want to achieve it by, how you're going to know you're achieving it. So for those of you who don't know SMART goals, make it specific, make it measurable, make it achievable, make it results driven, and make it timely. Right. So it has a deadline so that you can actually check in with it, and set up subliminal reminders of your goal. So this is where priming comes in. And we spoke before about music being used as priming, or messages on your mirror you can use as priming as well. But you can also set up some really cool things, that can encourage you to get to your goal. And that might be your password. When you log into things, I know I've had passwords I've set up, which are me being my goal, right? Or if your goal is just to have better self-talk and just have a better opinion of yourself, then you might change your passwords to "I am awesome at 2024," or "I will soar at 2024." Putting those things, the more you see something, the more it becomes familiar to the brain, and the easier it is for the brain to read that. You might set yourself up a vision board. Vision boards are amazing. I have a friend in the UK that's doing a workshop on them, and I was thinking of doing it too, but I just can't fit it in at the moment, unfortunately. But, find yourself, use something like Canva. And that's what I'm going to do mine on. So I'm doing mine hopefully tomorrow. And I'm just going to jump on Canva and go up and search a whole heap of images that I want to use. And you can, if you don't have a subscription, there's still a whole heap of great images you can get for free. And go into Canva and set yourself up a vision board. And then use that and make it your screensaver on your phone. I mean, one of my goals is around a lilac Lamborghini. I've just always had it. I've always loved them. I've always wanted to do something. So my screen is a lilac Lamborghini. Another one is having happy kids that get along, which doesn't always happen, but that's my other screen when you open up your phone. So you can use things like that you see all the time, some visuals to be able to reinforce you. You can use mantras. You can sit down. If you have a prayer practice, you can do it before or after your prayer practice. If you don't have that, link it up with something else. Maybe it's when you're in the shower, you think of some things. Maybe you write messages in the steam on the shower. There's so many ways that you can set up these subliminal messages and reminders on your goals. So make sure you do that. So for those of you that are on the recording, I hope that you got some value out of this. And for those of you listening to the podcast, thank you very much for tuning in. And I look forward to serving you again in our next episode. And for those of you on YouTube, thanks for watching. And if you've got any questions, make sure you flick me an email or let me know in some way, shape or form. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.